he writes, by denying table fellowship to Gentile Christians, Peter was in effect declaring them to be second-class citizens, with the implication that the only way they could become first-class citizens was to go the whole way of the proselyte and accept circumcision. In the final analysis, then, circumcision could be required as a precondition for social contact only if it was first a requirement for salvation. And thus, Peter's conduct not only immediately threatened the church's unity, but in the long run compromised the very basis of that unity. And because Peter was a leader in the church, others followed his example, leading to the rest of the Jewish Christians, even Barnabas, one of the Antioch church's leaders, giving up table fellowship with their Gentile siblings and resulting in a segregated and separated church. Jewish Christians eating together and non-Jewish Christians left out. There are so many parallel examples in American church history. Folks who were afraid to offend white slave owners, or men in positions of leadership, or those who refused to see and treat queer folk as fully human and as equals. And we have found ourselves with segregated and separated churches, with folks of color and women and our LGBTQ siblings left out and left to fend for themselves. Now, thanks be to God that the Spirit works all things for good. Thanks be to God that the Spirit is always bringing life out of death. Thanks be to God that we have seen such beautiful and resilient truth and creativity and hope from the black church and from immigrant churches and from feminist and womanist and liberation theologians, from queer Christians. Thanks be to God that new tables are being built and gathered around. God always finds a way to redeem our places of hurt. And at the same time, let us not paint over those situations of injustice and inequity and sin with a rose-colored hue. God's heart breaks whenever we treat one another as less than human. God's heart breaks whenever we fail to empathize with one another's plight, particularly those, as we see throughout Scripture, those whose dignity has been most ground down, those who have had barriers placed between them and full liberation, or between them and relationship with God. You can know God, but you have to be like this first. You can know God, but you have to do this first. Now there are situations where we compromise, where we promise together. We find a path forward together, even if it is not exactly as we want. And there are situations where our convictions lead us to challenge and even confront in love and humility, for who among us has not been in the wrong, friends, fellow pilgrims, and even leaders who are not only adding requirements to the gospel of grace by faith in Jesus, thereby excluding those from our tables that Jesus would have us welcome, but in so doing are leading others astray as well. Just as Paul confronted and challenged Peter. Now, honestly, what Paul did to Peter makes me cringe. Calling someone out in front of everyone is not how I would do it and not how I would prefer that it would be done. And there have absolutely been times when I should have spoken up more loudly and publicly, and I did not. Let me be clear, though, this is not a blanket affirmation that public confrontation is always the way to go. Jesus in Matthew 18 gives us an example of not going straight to DEFCON 1. But what we can see here is that sometimes it is necessary. Sometimes when practice does not match principle, when actions do not match words, when our preferences lead to exclusion, something needs to be said. The words have been said among us at Christ City Church, words both public and private, words in conversations and via email, words hard to hear, but good and right, that have led us to this place of being firm in our commitment to gender equality and racial equity and queer inclusion as examples of the gospel in practice. And I know that words will continue to be said as the Spirit leads, as we continue embodying that kingdom welcome in our actions, in our practices, and in our culture. Here's the thing. It's not compromise or conviction. It's both.